Hey friends, Chelsea here from Minimal Waste Living, and today we're going to talk about something a little bit different. We're finally going to talk about what happened to my philodendron Imperial Red. Spoiler alert, it was a bacterial disease. And before we get into it, if at any point you like what you're hearing, you find this video helpful, or you want to see more videos, please like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. And interacting with my content is one of the best ways that you can help support my channel and help me do more of this, because I love making plant videos, and interaction and comments, they not only help with algorithms and things like that, but they also help me want to keep doing this. And so yeah, it's much appreciated, so thank you in advance. Please like, subscribe, comment, do all the things, share with your friend if they have a struggling plant. Hopefully this can help you and them too. Let's get into it. So I feel like we talk a lot about pests and infestations like that, but I feel like there's just not a lot talked about other things that can affect plants, like viruses, bacterial infections, and fungal infections. So in this video, we're going to talk about what is a bacterial infection, how do we identify it, how do we save your plant, hopefully, and how are ways that we can prevent this from happening in the first place. What are you doing? So you might see me look down at the computer a few times. I tend to ramble a lot, so I'm just trying to keep myself on track and not make this such a long-winded video, which I am very good at doing. And anything that I'm talking about, if you want to look into it more, if you want more information, or just want to see where I am getting my information from, I have links to the most helpful resources that I used in my research down in the description below. So what is it? Erwinia blight, also known as leaf blight or leaf spot disease, is the bacterial disease that's caused by several different types of bacteria that I'm not even going to try to pronounce, and it spreads very quickly throughout your plant and can cause it to die or unalive itself. So it can quickly spread to the plant itself, but it can also transfer to other plants. The bacteria thrives in warm, humid, moist environments, which is something that we often try to provide for our plants, especially tropical plants. And unfortunately, that is just a breeding ground for bacteria. And in my research, I found that it didn't appear to be harmful to humans and pets. But something to keep in mind is that humans and pets can transfer those diseases to other plants. So it's not just one leaf touching another leaf to transfer those diseases. It can also be us touching, or our animals touching our plants and then going and touching other plants. So definitely something to keep in mind. So that's what it is, but how do we identify it? So there is actually a fungal blight, and there's also a bacteria blight. And those are different things and are treated very differently and are more or less severe for your plant depending on which one it is. If you have a fungal infection, that's relatively good news for you, because they're easier to treat than bacterial infections. Fungal infections can be treated with things like neem oil and fungicides. And I have resources for how you can do that linked down below. That's not something I've personally done myself, so I don't feel comfortable to give a lot of information on that, or to be able to say what's a good method or what's not a good method. So until I have that information for myself, tried and true tricks, then I don't really feel comfortable talking about it. But I do have resources for you down below if you find that what you have is actually a fungal infection. But for a bacterial infection, ways that you can identify that are irregular spots on your leaves that quickly multiply and spread to other parts of the single leaf or other parts of your plant. They can show as translucent spots that can be different colors. So they could be yellow, they could be brownish, they could be a copper colored, they could be silvery, and they're usually in a round shape, or they can sometimes be in a regular shape as well. those spots will be visible on both sides of the leaf. So sometimes you might see a spot on the top of a leaf of your plant, but then you turn it over and you don't see that same spot on the opposite side. That's not going to be true for a bacterial infection. For those, you will see it on both sides. And on that spot, it will actually thin out the leaf. So the leaf will have an indentation where those spots are. It'll be more translucent in those areas as well, meaning that you can see more light pass through it. You might also see water-soaked lesions. Those are things that I didn't actually find on my plants, but there is a video that I have linked down below that was very helpful in helping me find out, or to confirm, that what my Imperial Red had was a bacterial infection. And in that video, she did show what those water-soaked lesions can look like. And one other thing you might notice is a foul smell. Again, that's something that I didn't notice with my plants, but that can apparently be another indicator of a bacterial disease. And I do want to make a distinction between leaf damage and bacterial damage, or leaf disease. A damaged leaf will often have a crispy, where the damaged areas will likely be crispy, and they won't be spreading to other areas of your plant. If it's a diseased area, it's going to be softer, and it won't have that same kind of crisp to it. And I'll put a video so you can kind of see a comparison of what those two things look like. Alright, so here I have my Ficus elastica ruby, and this spot here is, or this area is, something that could potentially be mistaken for a water-soaked lesion if maybe you were looking at a picture of this leaf. If you're here in person and you can see it, you can feel it, and you can hear it, you can hear that it's actually crispy, it's brittle, it almost looks more like a burn than anything, whereas a lesion, a water-soaked lesion, would be, well, water-soaked. It would feel wet, it would feel mushy, it wouldn't hold its shape as well. So water-soaked lesions are going to look very different from damage on a leaf. Now, looking at my Monstera deliciosa here, we can see some more examples of leaf damage. You can see some leaf damage here. And again, they're crispy, they're brittle, but I think a better example that's a little more similar to the bacterial leaf spots are these damaged spots here. So they're a little bit more similar in shape and size. There is a tiny bit of an indentation there, but the difference here is that, again, they feel more brittle, they feel solid, they don't feel water-soaked or soft or mushy, and they're not spreading to other areas of the leaf. I think that's probably one of the biggest indicators of damage versus bacteria, is that the damage isn't going to spread to any other areas. Okay. So now that you know that you either do or do not have a bacterial diseased plant, how do we treat it? This is something that you're going to want to treat basically like you're a surgeon. You're going to want to make sure that you prep everything in advance and that you are constantly cleaning surfaces, your hands, and everything. Just be very, very careful of anything that you touch and make sure that you clean them very thoroughly after you've touched them. So the first thing that you want to do is just prepare your materials and prepare stations and things like that. Because again, you don't want to be touching unnecessary things after you've already been working with your plant, because you're going to have to keep going and washing your hands a million times. So get your pruning shears, get your disinfecting wipes or sprays to spray down any surfaces before and after you work with them, because again, your plant is diseased, it's vulnerable, and you don't want to be transferring other things that could possibly infect your plant as well while it's vulnerable. Get any alcohol wipes or sprays to spray down your tools or wipe down your tools as you're using them. And gloves. I didn't actually wear gloves when I was working with my plant because I just figured I would just be washing my hands a million times anyway, and I felt like if I was wearing gloves, That might give me a false sense of security that like everything is fine. I've touched things, but it's fine. But it's actually, your gloves are still infected. So make sure that you're getting latex or something similar to that if you have allergies. Just something that's disposable. Just don't use gardening gloves or something like that that are reusable things, because they are porous materials. They will carry that bacteria and those diseases and transfer them to other surfaces, plants, or things like that. And if you do have a fungus infection or a fungal disease on your plant, and you'll be using fungicide or neem oil or something like that, then you'll want to use gloves for things like that too. So again, you'll want to use disposable gloves like latex or something similar. For me, this Imperial Red was a new plant that I just bought, and I didn't realize that the spots on it were bacterial. I thought it was insect damage. I was getting it at a discount, so I didn't care. And I was like, oh, I'll just go home and treat it and everything will be fine. But then when I got home, I realized it was actually a bacterial infection. So since it was a new plant, I wanted to make sure that I inspected the roots. I wanted to make sure that I changed out the soil. And so I just wanted to basically start fresh with everything. So for me, I repotted my plant. So if you are in a similar situation or just want to repot your plant anyway, make sure that you are getting your potting materials or repotting materials together. Pre-mix your soil, get that all ready and just together in your station that you'll be working at. So again, you don't have to be touching unnecessary things. Get your pot ready, and even set up a watering station that's isolated from all of your other plants, and have a tray and everything all set up that you can disinfect after. And again, this is just all preparation to make sure that you're not transferring this disease to anything else. And again, just make sure that you are just disinfecting, washing, preparing as much as you possibly can. So now that you've done all of the preparation, it's time to kind of get started on figuring out what's going on with your plant. So the first thing that you can do is smell your plant, because that is can be an indicator of an issue with your plant, whether that's root rot or just disease in your plant. So you can start by smelling your plant and trying to figure out where that smell is coming from. Is it the leaves, the stem, the roots, the soil? Figure it out. You might not have that problem, or you might not find that your plant smells. I didn't find that my plant smelled, so that's not necessarily an indicator that your plant is fine, but it could be helpful to know maybe where that decomposition is coming from. Next, you'll want to inspect your plants to see how bad the damage is, basically. Is it just a couple of speckles or spots on one leaf? Is it covering an entire leaf? Is it multiple leaves? Does it carry down to the petiole? Does it carry to the stem? So you basically just want to inspect your whole plant and just kind of figure out how bad the damage is and what you need to do. Something to know is that if it is a fungal infection, those can possibly be reversed and those leaves can be saved. However, if it's a bacterial infection, that leaf cannot be saved. And the best thing that you can do is chop it off all the way down the petiole to the stem. And that can help prevent the spread of that disease through the stem to other leaves on your plant. I would not recommend cutting around your leaf, around the infected areas. For one of the biggest reasons is because you would be effectively opening a huge wound to the plant that could help that bacteria spread from an internal infection to the outside of the leaves and just help it spread even more. And of course, if you're opening a big wound on your plant, that's leaving it susceptible to other possible infections and things like that as well. So the best thing that you can do is just cut it right down to the petiole. So if you're not sure what a petiole is and all of the different terminology, that is okay. I actually didn't know what a petiole was until I think 2 days ago. So we're all learning here. So basically, maybe this isn't the best plant to be doing this on, but that's okay. So basically, you have the leaf, you have the stem that the leaves come off of, and then you have the petiole, which connects the leaf to the stem. And maybe it would be helpful to put a little diagram over here too. So now ideally it's just the leaf that's infected, but if you find that it's infected all the way down the petiole and even to the stem, you might be in worse shape than you might have hoped for. But in that case, try your best to see if there is an area on the stem closer to the roots that maybe is savable, or maybe even anywhere along the stem that maybe you could create wet sticks, or just kind of start fresh and just chop the plant and just see what happens. Just try to find some healthy nodes that maybe you can grow some roots from. But unfortunately, the disease is very quick spreading. So hopefully you catch it soon enough so it's not at that point. But if it is, just do whatever you can. If it's a plant that you absolutely love and you really want to save, try to see if you can create some wet sticks or something like that. But if it's a plant that you're not too crazy about and don't really care as much about, maybe it's not worth the risk of potentially transferring it to other plants or something like that. So I guess that's kind of something that on an individual basis, you might need to weigh the pros and cons of trying to figure out this disease and how to manage it. But the goal is here to cut back any areas or any leaves that are infected, and hopefully any new leaves that come in will be okay. So typically if you remove the damaged leaves, the infected leaves, the new growth should be okay. If it's not, then that's how you know that it's spread through the stem to the root system, and your plant is probably doomed, unfortunately. I don't know the status of my Imperial Red yet. This is currently what it looks like. It does have new leaf that is about to unfurl there, and that will tell me if I save the plant or not. If it comes through with those spots on it, then I know that the disease spread through the whole plant, and unfortunately that will be a loss, but definitely a learning experience. Unfortunately, I have another plant here that is no longer. It has unalived itself. And what happened was, when I brought these plants home, I didn't just get this plant that day. I got 4 other plants, and this plant, or 3 other plants. And this plant just happened to be touching the leaf of the Imperial Red and happened to contract the virus, and within a day it had spread through a lot of the plants. So I just chopped it. I saved what little stems that I could and put them in water, and put some in sphagnum moss, and the ones in moss did not make it. The ones in water, there's only 1 left so far. So unfortunately this plant did not make the chop, and that is because it was already unhealthy to begin with. That was from the clearance section, and I was just hoping that I could save it. It was a little Syngonium. I don't know what variety, but unfortunately it was already unhealthy. And plants that are already unhealthy and then you're trying to treat them for a disease, it's going to be so much harder for them to come back from that. Healthier plants will have a much easier time to bounce back when you're treating them. And I think overall the Imperial Red was in pretty good shape. So I think I'm pretty confident that it's going to be able to come back. But if you're already dealing with a sick plant, it's going to be a lot harder to save. So I just finished filming, and then I realized that I forgot to say some very important things. So once you are done with the whole process of inspecting your plant, chopping off any infected leaves, and or chopping up the stem to get some wet sticks and things like that, you want to make sure that you separate any of that from any other plants that you have. So if you're doing wet sticks, do not put them in another propagation box with other plants. make sure they have their own propagation box. If you are rerooting in water, make sure that it has its own propagation area, not only its own container, but also its own area that's separated from everything. And also your plant, make sure that your plant is placed in a place that is separate from everything else. Even if you have other infected plants, it's not just the one, make sure that, oh, she's eating. Make sure that you separate even the infected plants from the infected plants. They can be in the same area, the same space, but they should not be touching. There should be some physical space between them. If not just for the leaves not to touch, you also want that air circulation. You want to make sure that they just have space around them, because one plant could recover faster than another plant. And if one plant is starting to recover, but then it touches a leaf of a plant that's still struggling, it could potentially transfer that disease back to the plant and make it even worse again. So isolate. Right after you're done, make sure that you take your gloves off inside out. So you take one glove off and then you take the other glove off so that they're kind of like one inside the other. Put them in the trash. Disinfect everything. If you touched a chair, you touched the table, you touched the faucet handle, anything, make sure that you are disinfecting. Make sure you disinfect before and after you are pruning your plant or using any kind of tool in your plant. Make sure that you disinfect it before and after. Before, because you don't want to introduce something else possibly to your already struggling plant. And of course after, because you don't want that bacteria to be sitting on those materials. So you want to disinfect the area that you're actually using to cut, but also the area that you're holding too, because of course it'll be on your hands or the gloves. Sorry, it's very windy outside, so I don't know if you can hear that. And Daphne is losing her mind at the window. So yes, everything, disinfect everything. Disinfect surfaces. If you used a potting mat to repot or even just to sit your plant on, make sure that you're disinfecting that as well. So just make sure that you're cleaning your hands every single time you touch that plant, even well after you've cut off the infected areas. Make sure that you're still washing your hands every single time. I don't know, my voice is cracking. Every single time. And for me, I might be a little extra, but even if I touch the pot of this plant or put my hand in the soil to see if it's dry, I still wash my hands every single time. So before I touch anything. So I would recommend more caution than less, because you definitely just don't want this to spread or to happen again. So yeah, I would say more caution than less. Make sure that after you chop off the leaves, if you get rid of any soil, anything like that, make sure you put it in the trash and just get it out of your house, because you don't want that to be sitting in your house basically. In my mind, I'm like, if that's me, I want to get that out of here. So I would say as soon as you're done with your gloves, with the soil, with any leaves that you've cut off, anything like that, put it in the trash and put the trash outside. Okay, so now you're probably wondering, how do I prevent this in the first place? How do I ever stop this from happening again? And what do I do? So the number one thing that you don't ever want to do, especially for philodendrons with this type of leaf, those big thick leaves, is you don't want to top water them. You want to either bottom water them or just water right at the soil with something like a gooseneck watering can, or what I use is a tea kettle. I should definitely get a watering can, but for now it's working for me. But if you have a plant with a lot of foliage and it's hard to get right down to the soil, maybe consider doing bottom watering. The reason I don't love bottom watering is because you don't get the benefits that you do with top watering, where you can flush out with minerals and just kind of give it a good flush through. But if the alternative is possibly getting a bacterial infection, then of course I would opt for bottom watering. And to bottom water, all I do is take a bowl, a container, something like that, fill it with water, plop the plant in, wait until the soil is saturated, and then leave it somewhere so that it can thoroughly dry out. Another thing you can do is anytime you see water on your leaves, make sure that you wipe it off as soon as possible. You always want those leaves to be dry. But you also, those types of leaves are also prone to collecting dust. So you do want to clean them often, but if you are using a damp cloth or something like that, you just want to make sure that after you clean your leaves, you wipe them down with a dry cloth or a dry paper towel or whatever it may be to make sure that you completely dry off the leaves to prevent any kind of moisture accumulating. Never mist your leaves that are that same type of material. It's kind of hard to say like generally for all houseplants because some plants like misting. And some plants do well with top watering. I just know from my research and unfortunately my experience that philodendrons, especially this variety, don't do well with the top watering or having their leaves be wet. So just be really cautious about misting and top watering your plants. Another thing that you want to do is provide a lot of air circulation around your plants because that will help the soil dry out, it will help the leaves dry, and air is one of the best things that you can give your plants. So even having an aerated soil can be helpful. But yeah, just overall trying to create a dry environment above the soil for your plant is always a good idea for at least these types of philodendrons. And honestly, in my research, I found it to be very common for specifically Imperial Reds to have this type of bacterial leaf blight. And I'm not sure what that is or why that is, but definitely something to keep in mind and just be aware of if you are looking to get an Imperial Red or if you already have one. Just be really cautious about watering and air circulation. And just making sure that your leaves are really dry. Now, I think ever since this experience happened to me, I've been kind of traumatized by this whole experience. And now every time I look at my plants or if I go plant shopping, I'm just like hyper aware of any kind of spots and things like that that the leaves or the stems may have. And it was last weekend, I went to a Home Depot and I got some beautiful birds of paradise that were very cheap. Go check your Home Depot and see if they got some cheap birds of paradise because they were basically giving them away for free. But my friend put me onto that and told me I had to go check them out. So I did, and I figured while I'm there, I might as well look at the indoor plants. So I found a Ficus elastica ruby and I was like, ooh, this is beautiful, and I've been wanting one. And not necessarily the ruby variety, but I've just been wanting a ficus. And they had, I didn't realize until I got to the checkout, but they had these white, or it had these white little dots all over the leaves. And I had just checked out and I was like, what do I do? Do I keep it? Do I want to put myself through this again? I don't know, but I told myself, don't stress. If it happens, you know what to do, and you can't let this prevent you from ever buying plants again. So I went home and I researched, and I found out that it's actually very normal for those types of plants. It's very healthy. I'm going to put a picture here so you can see what that looked like. So if you have a ficus and you're kind of inspecting your plants now that you've watched this video and you're like, oh no, I have spots on this plant. Hopefully you can rest assured that it is a natural occurrence. It is healthy for the plants. What they are called are Cystoliths, and they are calcium carbonate crystals that form on the plant leaves. And you might also hear them called lithocysts, but that actually refers to the cells that contain the calcium carbonate crystals, but the carbonate crystals themselves are called Cystoliths. Hope that makes sense. I hope that this doesn't sound too scientific. I did so much research and everything that I read was just like so over my head and so scientific. I was like, how can I just like condense all of this and make it really digestible? So I hope that this has been digestible and easy to understand and follow, and not just feeling like a science lesson. But so the Cystoliths, the Cystoliths themselves, I hope I've been saying that right, Cystoliths, it's hard to say. They're not harmful to the plants. They're actually very helpful to the plants. They naturally occur to help the plant photosynthesize by scattering the light. And by doing that, it helps the plant process the light and feed itself more efficiently. So this is my Ficus elastica ruby. And when I first bought this plant, I saw these little white speckles on the leaves, and I'm going to put a side by side here so that you can see the difference between these markings on the leaf versus the bacterial spots on my Imperial Red. So the spots that you see on the ficus are the Cystoliths that are very beneficial to the plant, and the way that you can identify them is that you can see them around the edge of the leaf, and you most likely won't see them along the center of the leaf. They're more commonly found on more established leaves. So if we look at some of the new leaves that have come in, we don't see any there, but there is an exception here. Let's see if we can find the leaf. So if you can see this leaf here, you might be able to see some of those spots on this side of the leaf there. So of course there is an exception, but they will also be white in color. They will be more or less regularly spaced, very similar in size as well, and just overall very, very different from the spots that you would see from a bacteria infected leaf or a bacterial spot. So I really hope that you found this video helpful, and if you did, please hit that like button, please subscribe if you haven't already, and if you have some nice comments to put down below, please do let me know your own experiences. I hope that you're not going through this, but if you are, I hope that these tips help you, and I hope at least that they help you prevent this from happening to any of your plants in the future. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.